Well, I have to try this AI first. Now, how to move it up and down? Can somebody help? And okay, I'll start by talking about trust, transparency, AI, and these are all very difficult words. And so when we start with difficult words, one actually very fast conclusion is actually no point to talk about it, because there cannot be a conclusion. But there always can be a negated method. That means you actually scope the thing and then talk about it instead of trying to cover everything in general. So I actually have a chart to show what Richard Sutton and Geoffrey Hinton said about AI, both of them being the most important gurus of AI. Actually, now Richard Sutton is saying that everyone is going wrong. Okay. Yeah, so Richard Sutton is saying that everyone is going wrong. So where it went wrong was that the whole AI is not continuous. And Geoffrey Hinton is worrying about all the hallucination. And if you understand where they come from, is actually obvious, because Geoffrey Hinton is very much about back propagation, and Richard Sutton is very much about reinforcement learning. And there is a limit to what back propagation can do, and there are prerequisites of what reinforcement learning must have. So whichever way, two of the methods, actually they are very much described in mathematics. So this is what Richard Sutton said. And Richard Sutton was in Malaysia for 10 days. So I have a long chat with him. So AI Malaysia invited him here. And I think that was a very correct moment before he get the Field Medal. Today he is very busy. And because there are a lot of invitations for him to talk. Okay. Now we always think that AI is AGI, is a large language model, but actually it is not. Large language model is very much just the screen of a handphone. And we normally only pay attention to the screen, but we don't care about what is inside a handphone. And the handphone, inside a handphone, there can be things which are very, very fundamentals, like wires. But of course, there's no wires now. I'm just giving an example. Of course, today's handphone, if there are wires, you throw them away, right? And of course, there are definitely capacitance, small capacitance somewhere, so definitely there are circuit boards. So there are things which are very elementary, and there are things which are very advanced, like the 2 nano chips and so on and so forth. And it is very, very much the same in AI. AI is just 85 years of evolution, very much about reasoning and neural networks in the early days. Everyone was focusing on reasoning and neural networks until Richard Sutton in 1990 talked about learning as an approach. And that was the beginning of that everyone moved into learning, inclusive of Geoffrey Hinton. And of course, the discovery of learning can actually converge was around the time of around 2006 that we realized that actually learning can somehow converge. As to why learning can converge. Now, anything about why is always difficult. What, who, when, where, how can be easy, but why is always difficult. And the first thing about why, we have to know what is the order of universe. So if universe doesn't allow you to answer the question, there won't be any answer. So the research on that universe, the enabling part of the universe is what we call order. And David Bond and David Pitt actually had been pushing that research for years. But of course, this is a very core topic that you really couldn't find a lot of researchers. Now, the book Science, Order, and Creativity is written by David Pitt and David Bond. Now, from order, we actually realize physics. And of course, without order, there is no physics. But even within physics, there are deep branches, there are shadow branches, and of course, we think Newton's law is the easiest. But the truth is, today's warfare is very much about Newton's law. So Newton's law is not irrelevant. In fact, it can be very relevant. So that again, it applies to AI, it's the same thing. Everything that, when you look from scientific point of view, there can be irrelevance, there can be very relevance, depending on what context you are talking about. Now, for many thousand years, we never talk about economy. In fact, in Mandarin, we don't have the word Jingji. Jingji was actually very much from Japanese word. It was created by Japanese. So we have to step back as Chinese to think why for 5,000 years, we never had this word called Jingji. And it will be very interesting, but it's a subject that I don't think I want to delve into. Otherwise, we don't even talk about AI. So, well, I think the most important book in economics is most likely Wealth of Nations. Now, and actually, there's only one very important sentence, which is called invisible hand. And invisible hand is actually nearly equal to order. So the study of economics also have to start from some form of order, which is actually invisible hand. Now, why am I talking about all this? Because finally, AI has to apply to physics, has to apply to economics, has to apply to mathematics. Now, otherwise, it is not very useful. Okay, in 1940, there was a breakthrough in mathematics, but it was an accidental breakthrough by Saunders MacLean and Simon Allenberg. And that breakthrough is called category theory. And it was a subject that normal intelligence couldn't understand. And the mathematicians among themselves argued for 35 years. So it is definitely not something easy. But why we talk about category theory? Because today, we actually can see AI very clearly from category theory. Now, so the next two books, I will pass the symmetry monster, which is actually very important in building AI model. And again, mathematicians spend 30 years looking at universal models. And it was recorded by this mathematician, Mark Ronan, happened to be a friend, and describing the journey of discovering natural models. And of course, when you talk about AI models, they have to be a simulation or an implementation of natural model. Now, no matter what method you use, the how has to satisfy the why. So the category theory application of category theory in AI was first recorded by this book by Mazzola Guarino Mazzola and his gang, who actually work on category theory in music. Now, music is a very important, interesting subject because it has no meaning. It doesn't carry any meaning, but it carries the feeling, the perception of things. And for that, how we feel, how we perceive, we like to use the word semiotic, which cover everything inclusive of semantics, which is turning it into a meaning. Now that would be a semantic. So semiotic covers semantics. And in the last, this book was updated. So in 2022, they updated a chapter on AI. And if you go through this, you will see AI is juggling of symbols. It's juggling of symbols that reaching certain level, you become something called deep learning, become something called neural network, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, it's a juggling of algorithms. Now, even more recently, which is even more interesting, is that a group of scientists in Oxford, around 40 of them, instead of digging their head into
I'll just write
into
the
the
so
deep
for me to
equations of quantum physics, they actually try to use symbols to represent quantum physics. So the question asked in this book was, we have been talking about what of quantum physics, which is like what David Bond said, is the content of quantum physics, but we have never asked the how of quantum physics, and which is where the order come from and why and how. So this book was a very recent book, just published by Oxford professors Bob Coed, and if you don't understand category theory, this is a good book to just go through and see how people play with symbols. Play with diagrams. Now, it's not symbols, diagrams, and gradually get into some form of equation. Now, that is another interesting approach. Now, you compare that to AI. AI is juggling of algorithms and somehow get into the stage of learning and reasoning to a certain extent, but not a lot. But if you look at this diagrammatic approach, that's why it's called pictorial quantum processes, diagrammatic approach. And you find that if you draw diagrams alone, you actually can reach quantum physics, which is very interesting. And this is actually the same thinking process. And of course, this leads to how AI can be constructed. Now, these are all the fundamental books. And of course, Built to Last, Great by Choice by Jim Collin is about business. Now, finally, there are so many things that we talk about. But the most important thing we should focus on is on our purposes. Now, without any purpose, actually, honestly, we don't need to do anything, right? So in our group, we call that choice to purpose. Now, choice to purpose is very interesting. Is when you drive choice to purpose, you reach the level of connection. if you drive choice to purpose, you reach the level of connection. Then the hierarchy of intelligence is clear. That it starts from the highest hierarchy is intelligence, then connection, then reasoning, then learning. Then if you map that to AI history, you see that we started mainly on the reasoning side, and only around 2006 that we move on to learning side. And today's AI is very much about learning and reasoning to a certain extent, but not about connection. So to worry about AI will take over human being, sorry, that won't happen. It has not even reached the elementary level of connection. So finally, you want to know about human being? There is a great economist, Louis Fourmissin, that spent his whole life saying economy is about human actions, and he spent his whole life and, of course, trained a lot of students. They were this branch of scholars. We call them musicians, and they basically start from human action, again trying to build from human action how finally economy actually are constructed. Now, so why we list all these books? Because we are talking about a very difficult subject. We are talking about transparency. We are talking about the future. We are talking about AI. And even more difficult, this simple word called trust. Now, without a scope, actually, like what I first said, without a scope, honestly, we can stop talking because there will never be a conclusion. So this is basically what I do, is draw a scope and is to impress on everyone that AI is shockingly difficult, shockingly deep, shockingly extensive. You can use all the word of shockingly and you will still be shocked. Okay. And the one thing for sure is you don't have to worry because we are not shocked yet. Okay. Now, but if we step back, in this complex world, is there anything simple? Yes, there is something very, very simple. All our life is rested on one word called built. We built our career, we built our knowledge, we built our house, we built a company, everything we do nearly centered on this one single word called built. And we have to watch how built is subjected to change and environment. And as things changes, it reaches a point of diminishing return and it saturates. Now, great empire fails because of saturation, reaching a certain point of diminishing return. The Chinese culture reached the point of diminishing return around Ming Dynasty, not even Qing Dynasty. Is already going down because we already know we are lacking behind the West in science, except that we maybe won't accept it at that time. But we were going down. We should have known that we are going down. Right? So, but what is great? What is last? It's all about built. One word. So this basically, from very complex world, that you have all the books, that most likely is so difficult to read. If you want to read all this book, I will give you 10 years to read. Those books, for you to really grasp it, it takes about 10 years, minimally. Now, so we can't just wait 10 years to come back and talk, right? So we have to start simple again, and that is built. Now, how that built relates to AI is not that difficult. That we started computing around 1940. We talk about 1 and 0. So it was binary. But then at a certain point, we are able to handle more than binary. But how are we going to handle more than binary? We call that vectorization. And basically, you can think of, but vectorization is just a mathematical word, but it's not necessarily you have to vectorize blindly, because vector is a very small part of mathematics. And I will call it parallel. I'll call it parallel rather than just vector. Parallel will most likely saying that it is not interfering with each other, that they were actually mutually exclusive, nearly mutually exclusive, because there's no something completely mutually exclusive. So basically, you use that algorithm and you play with the parameters, the choices, then most likely you reach somewhere, but you need billions of choices to reach somewhere. It's called parameters. Now, but that is how simple thing leads to complex things. That's how very simple thing built one sentence, bit and byte. And whether you are just an object or whether it's a parallel, you actually move in two different directions. And if you're doing parallel, you will go to AI. And in AI, you have a learning style, you have the reasoning style. But then there are many other things like convolution, which is visual and so on. And those you can't really say it is just learning. It's senses, right? So now, when we think this chart is too simple, then if I put it in a mathematical way, it becomes impossible. Suddenly, it becomes impossible. But that is how God made this world, simple but difficult. The simpler it is, the more difficult it is, because we have to build the world. This is just a reminder that we reach curve of diminishing return. Always remember that we have to refresh ourselves, we have to relearn ourselves, we have to restart. We have to every day wake up and say, what am I learning? Am I learning something new? Now, if the day that you reach a point that I'm not learning anything new, it's good to ask around what I have not been doing. And this is important to cover. The least common factors and basis don't change. It's a very important thing to cover. Yep. That in nature, for whatever reason, that we always reduce to these common factors. And so we remember in the old days, we were taught that everything reduces to atoms, and that's it. There are only three things, okay, in atom. There is only neutron. Now I'm confused. Neutron and proton and electron. You know, sometimes we call it neuron. You know, you deal with too much with AI, you become neuron. And but that's not true anymore. Today there are well, I'm not sure. I haven't been tracking numbers of particles, but the last I tracked was several hundred. I don't believe they have broke 1,000 yet, but there are several hundred elementary particles. So it shows that it built from very simple thing to very complicated thing, but how the whole universe would work, God somehow has a simple diagram for you. So it's here. It's here. And these are all AI forms. There are many other more forms. And many, actually not more than 6, but some enough to confuse people. So, okay, so it sounds like very theoretical and useless. And but I think it's important to show, especially Chinese. I remember that when Professor Tu was in Jiao Tong Daxue, when in the Q&A session, the student asked him, Professor Tu, how much you make a year? You see, this is one of the problems of Chinese. We talk about money too much. Okay. Right? So, but in order to show that there is some money involved, Otherwise, you will say, what are you talking about? You're wasting my time. Okay, so now let me show you. This is what I did in 1987, telling IBM that the future is something like this, but it's not as beautiful as this. AI was not clear, everything was not clear, but the diagram is about the same. The reinforcement framework, the model, and the UNEDA, Haley layer. That is a layer that you call it distillation, you call it attention, you call it transformation, orchestration, all those things. Why are we talking about this UNEDA? Because, as you know, in mathematics, we cut across set theory, group theory, and category theory. And there are three mutually exclusive theory, and you have to link them back in order to see a total picture of mathematics. Therefore, you need UNEDA and Kelly, and which this is the one that link all of them up to give you a total picture of mathematics. Actually, in real life application, you actually can build it. So you find that what I did in 1987 was put up this chart to IBM. They give me money to do research for 2 years. After that, they say, go, you're not bright enough, and we are not going to fund you anymore. And I decided to quit. Okay, I'm quick forward. Okay, in 2007, our company market cap was 3.6 billion. I was worth 1.6 billion. So unicorn, the word unicorn was not even there yet. So I just want to say, it's very important that our Chinese culture said, 书中自有黄金屋. So I think it is sometimes important, to lure students back to do research. Because I accept that life with money is convenient. And therefore, you have to lure top students back to research. So I talk about this, it's not because money is important, it's actually convenient, but not necessarily that important, because if you don't learn, I think you don't have life. So this is the model that we have built. You see, that was 37 years ago. Based on the books, theories, you actually can more or less see future. And that's what I want to say. And when you can see things clear, then the word trust, transparency, future, all start to make sense. Thank you very much.